Hello everyone, Slothcakes here, and welcome back to some more Gundam shenanigans. Now previously, a bit far back, I've talked about the Gundam's odd arsenal that appeared throughout the OG TV run. But I did leave something out, and today is the day we talk about it. Since it's not just a weapon, it's actually a lot of things, and practical is not one of them, and I do think it deserves its own video, since there's just much more info on it. So let's introduce the G-Parts. Consisting of two machines, Part A and Part B, the G-Parts work alongside either with the Gundam or a core fighter, but can also combine with each other, becoming a variety of things. So let's start there. When Part A and B combine, they become the G-Fighter. The G-Fighter appearance-wise is quite blocky, pretty colorful, and he has some unorthodox look to him compared to other fighters. But the most notable thing is its size. Compared to other fighters like the core fighter, which has a length of 8.6 meters and a weight of 8.9 metric tons, the G-Fighter has a length of 15.2 meters and a weight of 58 metric tons. That's more than 6 times the core fighter. And as for weapons, we have two sets of missiles, being a 2-tube located under the nose of the fighter, and a 4-tube which is on the underside below by the thrusters. But the most interesting and eye-catching are these puppies right here, a twin megaparticle cannon located on the top of the unit. These cannons are described to be quite similar to the Gundam's beam rifle, both being experimental and using E-caps. So now why? Well, the G-Fighter's purpose is to be aerial support for White Base and the Gundam. Having firepower that can deal with mobile suits, it can also defend and fight for itself, but can also and mainly transport the Gundam. The G-Fighter can have the Gundam rest on top of it and deliver it to locations, either to or from battle or help with aerial combat. This is needed since the Gundam, first of all, can't fly, and he's very slow. It would take him a while to get to places by foot. And many times having White Base drop him off is dangerous, so boom, here comes the G-Fighter. And with its weapons, that means the Gundam doesn't need to exhaust its very limited ammo getting to the destination, and compared to other mobile suit carriers like the Gunperry, while they can carry more mobile suits, the G-Fighter is faster, and unlike the other ones, once it drops off the Gundam, it can join the battle. But now let's focus on the B-Part. This thruster-like unit can snug itself onto the Gundam and kinda look like a mecha mermaid, and it becomes the Gundam plus G-Parts, or the G-Sky. This allows the Gundam to fly like a jet and travel in high speeds, and when he's in this mode, he still has access to all of his weapons, head Vulcans, bazookas, beam rifle, and he can even use the beam saber. Now, we never saw him use the hyper hammer, which would be interesting. But anyways, since he's connected to the B-Part, he does have the 4-tube rockets near the thrusters. Now, as a concept of providing the Gundam flight, you would think this is the same as the G-Fighter, which you'd be kind of right, but there are some key differences. First, with the G-Sky, you don't need a second person to pilot it. And in terms of production, it is just the B-Parts, while the G-Fighter is both the A and B, so it is less costly. And since the Gundam is in it instead of on it, he can perform more radical movements since the Gundam won't fall off. And because of the odd position the Gundam's in, it can benefit certain scenarios like mass aerial combat. However, compared to the G-Fighter, there are some problems. First is the limited weapons, with only being the rockets, you have to use the Gundam's limited resources. And this is not for transportation. Unlike the G-Fighter, which could drop the Gundam off, this would have to be purged and later retrieved. So while the Gundam plus B-Parts seems a little complex and not too practical, we're not done with the B-Parts just yet, because we have another thing to talk about, and it's known as the G-Sky. Sharing a similar name, it's the B-Part connected to the core fighter. This boosts all of its aerial capabilities and gives it what you expect it would. It's just the core fighter, but now bigger and faster. And that is a slight problem because it does have the same weapons that the core fighter does, with the addition of the B-Part missiles underneath. So if you needed more firepower, he's not the best guy for the job. So you might be thinking this thing looks like the poor man's G-Fighter, just lacking the firepower, which, yeah, you would be correct, but there are some nice things about it. First, it's just the B-Parts, unlike the A and B of the G-Fighter, but more notably, the G-Sky's a lot more accessible, just being a pampered up core fighter. However, I did purposely leave out a major problem the G-Sky had, so let's highlight it now. And I'm just gonna zoom in. You see that middle part between the B-Part and the core fighter? Yeah, that's exactly what you think it is. That is the lower half of the Gundam that combines the core fighter to the G-Sky. Do I really need to tell you why this is a bad idea? Anywho, the G-Sky is longer than the G-Fighter, coming in at 22 meters long. And as for weight, I feel like my sources are wrong because the G-Sky comes in at 100 tons, and that just seems like way too much. The G-Fighter comes in at 58 tons, and this is only the B parts, which is a little more than half. And for the Gundam, its max weight is only 60 tons. So I don't know how half the Gundam and half the G-Fighter somehow makes up 100 tons. This seems like a reasonable weight for the Gundam plus B parts, which is also named the G-Sky, so maybe there was an error there. Getting back on track, what benefits does the G-Sky have? Maybe you could form the Gundam in mid-air or mid-combat, but then why would you deploy this in the first place? The placement's also weird because the Gundam's on its back, while with the Gundam plus G parts, the Gundam's actually flipped over, so I don't even know if you could turn into the Gundam plus G parts. It's just a bad idea. There's no benefit from putting half of your Gundam at risk. It's way too expensive an idea, it's way too dumb of an idea, and it's way too dangerous. There's no benefit from it. I can't think of a realistic scenario where this would actually work. Now this does have a better version called the G-Sky Easy, which is 100,000 times better because it replaces the legs of the Gundam with just a combining unit. So you just need this combining unit, the B parts, and a core fighter, and it does practically the exact same thing. So with the B part out the way, now let's focus on the A part, and I do have to give you a warning, please mentally prepare yourself and keep an open mind. When the A part combines with the top half of the Gundam, with or without the core fighter, it becomes the G-Bull, a heavy duty tank. And like the G-Fighter, for what this thing is, it is huge. It comes in at a length of 18 meters and a max weight of 75 metric tons. And as for appearance, it looks extremely goofy with the obvious top half of the Gundam. And you would assume the cockpit of the A part is the front of the tank, but that's actually the back. Next notable thing are the shields. Due to the Gundam, well, just being exposed out in the open, they added 2 shields on each arm for extra protection. As for weapons, he does have the 2-tube missile launchers located at the nose of the A part, but more importantly, there's the mega particle cannon up top. It can do everything the G-Fighters can, it can swivel around, it's very similar to the Gundam's beam rifle, all that snaz. However, due to it being connected to the top half of the Gundam and the core fighter, it now has a much higher output behind it. It's able to dish out much stronger shots and can dish out even more shots. And for the funniest thing in his arsenal is his hands. Because the Gundam's on his back, his hands are facing forward, so he does have access to them. It's shown him holding the beam rifle, which he can use, but maybe he can hold a hyper bazooka and use it, maybe he can hold 2. Could he use his other weapons? If the G-Bull was close enough, could he just smack someone or use the beam saber? Could he maybe use the hyper hammer? Who knows? Unpractical? Yeah, but this whole thing's unpractical, so not really a problem there. Anywho, being a tank means it drastically loses the mobility it has as a mobile suit, since on treads you can't go on all terrains. And since this tank is so big and heavy, it is noted that it can go on even less terrains a normal tank can. And while you can say with the G parts and the extra shield, he's more bulky, but in my opinion, I feel like the tank is much easier to deal with than a mobile suit. With less mobility, it's easier to focus fire. And with the abundance of beam weapons that soon hits the 1-year war later on, the armor's not really gonna help. It's everything I said with the G-Sky, but now in tank form. Instead of the lower half, it's now the top half. The benefits don't outweigh the negatives. It's really just a bad idea. But I gotta say this, it's impressive. You really had to think outside the box to screw someone over this bad. Like, I'm impressed that whoever designed this got the mobile out of mobile suits. So kudos on you. And like the G-Sky, there is a G-Bull Easy, and it's the G-Bull without the core fighter and the Gundam, and it still has the shield somehow, which just looks really weird. Kinda looks uncanny with just this massive gaping hole. And when in this mode, there can be a pilot in the A-part cockpit, so now the back becomes the front. And to end this segment off, I did think of a redesign that may or may not be better. One thing I thought of is, what if this connected to the Gundam's back and upgraded his backpack? But not only that, maybe the NPCs reaches over his head and past his shoulders and he becomes some kind of bootleg Mad Rock gun cannon type thing. And yeah, there's a lot of problems to this and if it would work and you need to smooth out the edges, but as a concept I thought it would be nice. He would be weighed down and it would be slow as hell, but if we gave him like a shield and a hyper bazooka, he could do some serious damage and he could just lay down a lot of shots. And with some additional effort, if you really wanted to, you could somehow put this on the gun cannon or the gun tank. Whatever the idea is, I feel like you guys could also think of a much better idea than just being a damn tank. Now we're moving on to the finale, the grand combination, the fusion of both parts and the Gundam, and it's known as the G-Armor. The G-Armor consists of the Gundam lying on his back inserted in the A and B parts. He has the shield on his side similar to the G-Bull, and his legs are inserted into the B part similar to the G-Sky. Now, to no one's surprise, this thing is massive, being 28 meters long and 120 metric tons. It's what you expect when you combine the weight of the Gundam and the G parts. And as for weapons, well, we've covered all the weapons. It has the missiles on the A part, it has the missiles on the B parts, it has the NPC on top, but now it's even stronger because it's powered by the Gundam's generator as well. And the Gundam does have access to his hands, but they're pointing in the opposite direction, so maybe if something's tailing you, you can shoot it. But he doesn't get any new shiny bells or whistles in this form. We've covered all the weapons before, so there's no reason for me to repeat myself. So here comes the big question, and it's the same question I've asked with every single thing we've covered so far. Why? What's the purpose? Well, the G-Armor is, well, the G-Fighter but with a stronger beam weapon, a higher gen output, and bigger. And we can also say bulkier since he has the two shields on the side. And we can't forget the biggest feature that the G-Armor has, and that's the Gundam inside. Now, something cool it can do is bolt out. The G-Armor in mid-air can deploy the Gundam, just dropping him off, and when it becomes the A and B part, it can then reattach itself, becoming the G-Fighter. And a neat feature that was suggested by Omuro was when it deploys, it actually gets the two shields and overlaps them, becoming a stronger shield. And while extremely situational but really funny, like I said, the G-Armor can become the Gundam and G-Fighter, but this goes every way. You can deploy the G-Bull easy without the core fighter and the G-Sky. Those two mid-combat can become the G-Armor, then the G-Armor can become the Gundam and G-Fighter. So while you deploy those two things, at the end of the battle you end up with a Gundam and a G-Fighter. And this goes the opposite way as well. You can deploy the Gundam and the G-Fighter, it can become the G-Armor, then it can detach becoming the G-Bull and the G-Sky. Very convoluted, very complicated, but it's funny. And for a practical sense, besides niche scenarios just to make the episode more interesting, I can't see this being used a lot. Besides the G-Armor being able to open get maybe and get out of scenarios, this honestly just seems like so much work when the Gundam can just hop on the G-Fighter for a ride. But it's not all negatives, there's some benefits. The Gundam is pretty protected inside the G-Armor with the additional shields, he's pretty snug. And he won't fall off it like the G-Fighter, so it can perform more radical movements. Plus, with the weapons that the parts have, the NPCs and all those missiles, when the Gundam gets dropped off, he's not using any of his limited resources. But even with that, as a whole, it's just really redundant. The G-Fighter is fine enough, and the G-Armor just seems overcomplicated. And even when it doesn't have the Gundam inside, it's still a whole lot of nothing. For a strong flyer that can transport a mobile suit and have a beam weapon, it just seems way too complex. Now I think it would have been much more interesting if the G-parts could connect with the Gundam just differently. Like I said with the G-Bull, maybe the A and B parts could just become armor like the Chobin armor or similar to that of the Perfect Gundam and just give him an upgrade. Yeah, it would be like a bootleg Mudrock, but that would look cooler than just being a big ass jet. With some creativity, you could think of some interesting ideas on how the A and B parts could work with the Gundam, and even maybe things like the gun cannon and gun tank. Because, well, that's what this thing is at the end. At the end of the day, it's just more shit for the Gundam to use. And in meta speak, that's what the G-Armor is. It gave the Gundam something different to use to make his battles more interesting each episode. But unlike things like the Beam Javelin or hell even the Hyper Hammer, the G-Armor did not age well. At best, the G-Fighter is the best one, being a strong fighter, having beam weapons and can be transportation. The G-Sky just being the bottom half of the Gundam is so stupid. The B parts with the Gundam is very situational, but I can dig it, and the G-Bull is just a hole shore that endangers the top half of the Gundam, and the G-Armor is just complicated for no reason. And while the easy versions are better, they did have their problems because in future iterations, the G parts actually get replaced. In future iterations of the 1 Year War, being the trilogy movie and moving forward, the G-parts exist only in simulation. The concepts for them exist, but they were never made. But they were used to build something, so let's introduce the Core Booster. The Core Booster, also known as the G-Armor but practical, is the best of the G-Fighter and G-Sky put together. To give you the skinny, the Core Booster is a core fighter with a backpack attachment. It acts similar and is based off the G-Sky. It can do everything the G-Sky can, but like the G-Fighter, the Core Booster is equipped with some good firepower. Now, due to how the Core Fighter connects onto the booster attachment, it folds up and it doesn't have access to the Core Fighter's missiles. Thankfully, the booster attachment does give you a few weapons. You have the 25mm machine guns, which come in pairs that are located in the nose of the Core Fighter. And as for the attachment, you have 2 sets of missiles, with 2 missile launchers being located on the side of the booster unit, and a bomb bay located underneath. But the most important thing is on the side you have 2 beam cannons. Now, to repeat myself, this beam cannons act very similar to the Gundam's beam rifle. They're powered by E-caps, experimental, and they do some pretty good damage. Now, due to not having as strong as a generator, you don't have as powerful shots and you don't have as many shots. And compared to the G-Fighter, its NPCs are on a swivel, while these are mounted, but basically every single weapon is mounted on a flyer. The G-Fighters is actually the unorthodox one out the group. Plus, the Core Booster can carry a mobile suit on it, helping with transportation. The only thing it lacks compared to the G-Parts is the land capability of the G-Bull, which is a good thing. And also not being able to carry a mobile suit inside of it, which, yeah, but putting it on top of it is just as fine, you're not losing much. And let's not forget one of the biggest benefits, and that's the booster unit is much easier to produce than the G-Parts. Like, I mean, come on. As a whole, the Core Booster is so insanely better than the G-Parts. Yeah, you can't do your combination shenanigans and all that snaz, but it's cheaper, it's better, it does all the good things you want it to do, and it's also easier to use. All you need to do is just train someone who already knows a core fighter to use the Core Booster and you're good. Now, don't get the wrong idea, I don't hate this thing, I actually like the G-Parts. I like the goofy combinations. Now, I think this thing is a death trap and will waste the resources, but I already covered that. And if you're a fan of it as well, then don't worry, because while the G-Parts did get replaced in universe, we do see its soul, or like its remnants, in future things. If you're a fan of the G-Fighter or the G-Sky, we see that with the Core Booster. But if you're a fan of the G-Sky with its transportation of mobile suits, we see that in mobile suit carriers like the Base Jabber, a flight unit dedicated to transporting mobile suits long distances. Are you a fan of the Gundam with the B-Parts? Do you want your mobile suit to fly like a jet? Well, in future mobile suits we have things like the Zeta Gundam, which can transform into a jet and fly. But maybe the combining of the G-Parts is up your alley. Well, we have things like the G-Defender, combining with the Gundam MK2, making the Super Gundam. And as for the G-Bull fans, and let's just bring up the Double Zeta, a mobile suit consisting of 2 parts and a core fighter, and it can transform into a roided up G-Armor, the G-Fortress, and it can even split apart into smaller units. So for an in-universe reason, maybe the G-Parts were just too big-brained. Maybe it was a lot of small good ideas thrown together without really any direction. Maybe it just took some time for those individual ideas to flourish into something of their own, just maybe needing another great mind and some advancement in tech to achieve it. Then again, complicated is the Double Zeta's bread and butter. Anyways, thank you for watching, Slothcakes here, and have a good one.